What have we missed this week on the Great Reset?
Yeah, so, I mean, this topic is so gigantic, which is why people really do need the book. More than a year's worth of research went into that. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of footnotes and sources and things we could talk about. One of the things I think that we have not hit particularly hard is the role not just of banks, but of the Federal Reserve and central banks specifically. They are driving much of this agenda right now, and they're going to drive it even harder into the future. And they're actually going to force, in a top-down way, most banks that rely on them in any capacity to go along with much of this Great Reset stuff.
Go ahead. Hang on just a second. Let me just give you some context. I remember getting a call from a guy who was at the top of one of the big banks, one of the biggest banks in the world. It was the weekend that they started talking about TARP. Nobody had known about it. It was a Sunday night. He called me. He said he lived in New York. He said, I've just walked home. And he said, I cried almost all the way home. Now, this is a very reasonable guy, a big businessman. And he said, people don't know what's coming. And he told me the story that when they got in with the Treasury and the Fed brought in all of the banks into the basement of the Federal Reserve in New York, one Sunday night, had them all there, and his bank said, we don't want the bailout. We don't. And they said, you're all taking the bailout. No one is leaving here without participating in this. We're all doing it. And they forced these banks into TARP. And that kind of stuff is coming again. They've already done it once. The Fed will force every bank to be involved.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And many of the people who are in the leadership at the Fed, Jerome Powell, Lael Brainard, these people were in the Obama administration or were involved in the Fed back when TARP happened, back in the early quantitative easing. They were involved in all of that stuff. So they're very familiar with how with these strategies, with how these things work. Just this past week, the Jerome Powell, at the head of the Fed, came out and said that they're going to roll out climate change stress tests on banks. And what that means effectively is they're going to go to the banks and they're going to start, they're going to go to the banks and they're going to start saying to them, okay, are you prepared for a climate change crisis? Do you have policies in place that make sure that you're not lending to people that are worsening that crisis? Do you have, and what they mean by that is essentially ESG scores. Do you have an ESG system in place, making sure that all the people you're doing business with are going along with our green agenda, are going along with the Green New Deal and things like that? That's going to become the reality for these banks and everyone who does business with the banks too. And it all comes from the Fed. So it's not just, is Bank of America green? Is everyone that's doing business with Bank of America also going green? So you're not going to be able to get a bank account with these people in the future because of the Fed. That's going to be our reality.
So I think what people don't understand, and this is why it's so critical that you read the book and then you start logically thinking it through, because it's not about control on the top end. It is about unconstitutional controls on the top end that affect the everyday person. And so when you say, a climate stress test, what they're saying is that the globe is going to go green. And so all of the money is going to be pouring into these Green New Deals and solar panels and everything else. So if you're going to give a loan as a bank to somebody who is building a refinery or are drilling, when that thing falls apart, that becomes a very risky deal. And so they're going to say to the bank, you can't make those risky deals because that's not the future. That's like giving loans to the Fisher Carriage Company instead of General Motors. So give it to General Motors. And they're going to force them to do this. And as Justin just said, if the bank doesn't give the loan to industries that they have picked and choose through the government and through, the World Economic Forum and all of these other things, if the bank won't give them money, there is no parallel. You cannot do business. They also are putting in on this that if you are an oil company and you're like, I don't need your loan. I don't want any of your money. If you are another company that has a loan from a bank and you make some sort of oil widget, but that's not even your main business. It's just an oil widget. That oil widget will now count against you. And so the bank will say, you're doing business with this company by making these oil widgets. You have to stop selling them or we cut off your funding.
That's right.
All the way down the line to your house. You can't buy that house. You're buying that house. Does it have solar panels on it? Does it have this or that? That's too great of a risk. You speak out against social justice. You speak out against global warming. You are a risk to the bank.
That's right. That's exactly right. You're not going to be able to buy, even if you could find someone who is selling a gasoline-powered car in 10 years, even if you could find someone who's allowed to sell those, you're not going to be able to get a loan from a lender to buy that car. You're going to have cash to buy that car. And you probably won't even have cash in 10 years because they're trying to phase that out. That's the whole point. Every aspect of your life is going to change because these institutions are going to make it impossible for you to live your life the way you're living it now. Through this approach, through the financial system primarily, but secondarily by the financial system putting pressure on corporations, they're going to phase out all of these other products and services and things as well. So you're going to wake up one day in 10 years, if you don't read this book, you don't understand what's going on with the Great Reset, you're going to wake up in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. The world is going to be totally different, and you're not going to have any idea why. You're not able to buy the things you used to be able to buy. You're not able to go the place, say the things you used to be able to say. None of it's going to make any sense to you. And it's because this Great Reset framework behind the scenes has been working this entire time to reshape the economy, to reshape society through the financial system, through corporations. And our world is going to change whether you understand it or not. The only chance we have of stopping it is for people to understand it, and then we have to change our behavior to try to make this thing, stop this thing in its tracks. If people don't understand it, this train is going to keep going. It's not going to fix itself. So you got to educate yourself about these issues and really know it. I know the Fed is not a sexy topic, but it needs to become a sexy topic. You need to know this stuff.
Yeah, it is the time for frivolous talk and frivolous action, and Pepsi versus Coke is truly over. Justin, I'd like to talk to you about another book. It'll probably take us another year to do the research on this, but the metaverse, the AI situation. I mean, I know a lot of the leading futurists in the world. And I read this stuff all the time. And the one thing we don't have in this book is the effect. This is really being caused by a few things. One, greed. China is the new model. People can get rich, and if they're doing crony capitalism like in China, it's a great system for some. It sucks for most everybody else. But you also have the industrial revolution, this new AI industrial revolution that is going to take place between now and 2030. And by 2030, 40% of all jobs that we know of now will be gone. So it is going to change our society fundamentally. The other driving factor in this is the fact that when they bailed these banks out, we all knew at the time, you can't do that. But they were desperate. They did what they had to do, violate the free market to save the free market. I don't think a lot of it, I think most of it at that time was not nefarious. But they have since then, because everything that I've been telling you for the last 15 years about the banking system is true. They have denied it the entire time. We have never come into a recovery for our financial system. We are still paying the piper for all of this. And so they know, and so they're coming up with a system to protect it. And they don't care about protecting anything else other than the financial system. So you can take all nefarious things out and say, why would these people do this? Because they know what they've done has destroyed everything. Plus, technology is now rising. We're entering a new world, but they're devising it without you and without your knowledge. and it makes you into a literal slave, having to do what they tell you to do. The book is The Great Reset. You can get it at Glenn's new book right now. Get a copy, read it, share it with as many friends as you can. This has to be the litmus test for the midterm elections, because we need fighters in there that understand it. The glensnewbook.com.